Otto Ohlendorf sat calmly in a Nuremberg witness chair in 1946 and described how his Einsatzgruppe D had executed roughly 90,000 people in the Soviet Union between June 1941 and 1942. Victims were forced to undress, kneel at the edge of pits, and lie face down before a single neck shot ended each life. Ammunition saved, process refined. On 1 October 1946, the Allied Tribunal declared the Gestapo a criminal organization responsible for crimes against humanity. The tribunal declared them criminals, stamping the verdict into international law with the authority of 4 victorious powers. But how many actually faced the consequences? The gap between verdict and reality starts with what the Gestapo had built. Working alongside SS and SD units across occupied Europe, the organization facilitated the deportation and industrial murder of millions of Jews, processing names, trains, and timetables with bureaucratic precision. Then came the Night and Fog Decree, signed on December 7, 1941, under which roughly 7,000 opponents from France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway were secretly arrested and vanished into camps, their families left with no word, no body, no grave. By 1945, Allied authorities had compiled wanted lists totaling about 3,000 former Gestapo officials, men who had run interrogation cells, signed deportation orders, and supervised executions in basements from Lyon to Riga. 3,000 names, 3,000 wanted men. The hunt was about to begin across a shattered continent, but the arithmetic of justice would prove far stranger than anyone expected. The American Dachau military tribunals, operating from 1945 to 1948, sentenced 279 defendants to death, many of them Gestapo and SS members, tied to concentration camp atrocities and the murder of downed Allied airmen. Of those, 222 hangings were carried out at Landsberg prison, the same fortress where Hitler had once written Mein Kampf. The British ran parallel proceedings at Hamburg's Curio House, producing 39 death sentences but executing only 21, a quiet attrition of clemency that would soon become the rule rather than the exception. One figure breaks the pattern entirely. Across the entire British-occupied zone of Germany, courts handed down 5,025 death sentences between 1945 and 1955, a staggering number on paper. Yet only 13 of those executed had been convicted specifically for war crimes or crimes against humanity. The rest involved ordinary criminal cases under reconstituted German law, or sentences quietly commuted as appeals dragged into the early 1950s and political winds shifted. Remember Ohlendorf's 90,000 victims in the Soviet pits. Remember the methodical neck shots, the people forced face down into the earth. The mathematics simply refused to balance. 13 executions for crimes against humanity in an entire occupation zone, set against a continent of mass graves. But the deeper scandal was not in the courtrooms that delivered too few hangings. It was in the courtrooms that never opened at all, because some of the worst architects of the machinery never saw a defendant's chair. Austria offered a slightly sharper edge. The Volksgericht, the Austrian people's courts established after liberation, sentenced around 43 former Gestapo employees to death between 1945 and 1955, and at least 30 of those sentences were actually carried out, a higher execution ratio than anything seen in the British zone. But the Austrian record collapses the moment one name enters the frame. Franz Josef Huber had run the Vienna Gestapo office from 1939 onward, overseeing the deportation of tens of thousands of Austrian Jews to Auschwitz, Theresienstadt, and the killing fields of the East. He was arrested by the Americans in 1945, briefly questioned, and then released. He was never tried in Austria. He lived openly in Munich and later in Bavaria, working in business, drawing a pension, dying of old age in 1975. Then, there is the figure that defines the whole story. Between 1945 and 2005, 6 full decades of supposed reckoning, West Germany convicted only about 6,500 people for Nazi crimes. 6,500 convictions for the bureaucratic and physical murder of approximately 6 million Jews, plus millions of Soviet prisoners, Roma, disabled patients, and political opponents. The ratio is roughly 1 conviction for every 1,000 Jewish victims alone. The men who designed the deportation timetables, signed the arrest warrants, and supervised the shootings did not simply escape execution. Many of them escaped any meaningful charge at all, and several escaped into something far more useful to a frightened post-war West. By the early 1950s, priorities had shifted. Stalin was the enemy now, and West Germany was the front line. Lower-level Gestapo officers who had spent the war interrogating resistance fighters and tracking down Jews quietly re-entered civilian life, and many returned to precisely the careers they had practiced under Hitler. Police departments in Bavaria, North Rhine-Westphalia, and Lower Saxony rehired former Gestapo men as detectives and inspectors. The Bundesnachrichtendienst, West Germany's foreign intelligence service founded in 1956, absorbed dozens of veterans of Nazi security work, including men who had served in the Eastern occupied territories. Allied authorities, meanwhile, were emptying Landsberg prison. Between 1951 and 1958, U.S. High Commissioner John McCloy and his successors commuted sentence after sentence. Men condemned for mass shootings in 1948 walked out of prison gates by 1955, sometimes earlier. The dramatic Nuremberg hangings of Ribbentrop, Kaltenbrunner, and Frank in October 1946 had created a powerful public image of justice delivered. But that image masked something far less heroic underneath. Legal continuity had quietly preserved the careers of judges, prosecutors, and bureaucrats who had served the Reich. Denazification questionnaires were filed, stamped, and forgotten. The machinery of genocide did not vanish in the spring of 1945. Its operators removed their uniforms, updated their resumes, and slipped back into the institutions of a new German state that desperately needed functioning police, functioning courts, and functioning intelligence officers to face the Soviets. The verdict of history lands with uncomfortable weight. The vast majority of Gestapo personnel, the clerks, interrogators, regional chiefs, and field officers who had made the Holocaust logistically possible, never faced justice at all. Legal continuity and rapid rehabilitation became the norm rather than the courtroom exception. A quiet bargain struck between Cold War necessity and moral exhaustion. Historians have noted a further bitter irony. Many of the local Gestapo officers who were tried faced charges for individual acts of brutality against German citizens, not for their role in the industrial murder of Jews across occupied Europe. The crimes that mattered most were precisely the crimes least prosecuted. This pattern of perpetrators reabsorbed and atrocities legally minimized would echo through Cambodia, Rwanda, and Bosnia in the decades that followed, a template of impunity repeated across continents and generations. Return to the question at the start. The tribunal at Nuremberg declared the Gestapo criminal in October 1946, but the gap between that declaration and any meaningful accountability reveals how quickly justice bends to political expediency. Roughly 13 executions in the British zone for crimes against humanity. About 6,500 West German convictions for the murder of 6 million Jews. One Vienna Gestapo chief dying peacefully in Bavaria in 1975. The numbers do not lie, even when the verdicts did. The deeper question is whether any society facing the next genocide will choose differently when the convenient answer is once again to look away.